First of all, I would like to thank ITB Berlin for having me as keynote speaker on the Great Reset. I'm Messner with the SIO AG in Frankfurt, Germany. Let me first give you a short overview and introduction before we jump right into the topic that is currently being discussed among the highest priorities with most leaders in politics, economy, and society, largely in part because of its advocacy by the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset. Last year, SIO planned its seminal appearance at ITB, and ITB was in turn abruptly cancelled, which of course didn't feel very good at all at the time. We had been concentrating all of our efforts on the tourism industry for many years in order to revolutionize travel technology. And at the very moment of presenting it to the industry, that very industry as a whole seemingly fell apart within a matter of just a few weeks. Of course, we didn't expect a positive 2020 with a false start like this, but as it turned out, 2020 became, by far, the best year in our corporate history. We more than doubled our customers, workforce, and office space, and not a single person in our team had a single second of Kurzarbeit. And to the extreme contrary, we all put in extra hours to cope with the unexpected expansion of our business that drastically accelerated for us in 2021. What happened? Digitization has always been a megatrend before the pandemic, but has been turbocharged by the global health crisis and all of its fallouts. Now we seem to have digitization on steroids. Things that were impossible and unthinkable of before COVID now seem to be the new normal. Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum in Davos, even advanced the idea that COVID could become such an important turning point that the era before the pandemic could be called BC, denominating before COVID instead of before Christ. I wouldn't go this far yet, but at least for the tourism industry, there has never been an event that compares to COVID and its fallout that actually brought the entire industry to such an abrupt and almost complete stillstand within just a few weeks. There are basically two possible outcomes after COVID. Everything returns to normal as we have known it before the pandemic, or everything will have changed forever. The Great Reset postulates the latter and calls for deliberate changes in the ways government, companies, and all of us as a society behave in order to rebuild what is left after the pandemic in a more sustainable, equitable, and even more tolerant way that will foster the key concept of Klaus Schwab's of stakeholder instead of shareholder capitalism. Whether or not one believes in the approach of the Great Reset is secondary. One has to think about it because it resonates with many of the world leaders, providing for the highly likely possibility that at least parts of it will be transformed into reality. I don't want to just concentrate on the Great Reset in terms of deliberate action defined by world leaders, but in a much broader sense. There will be change no matter what world leaders or experts say, because there already is massive change in many of the fundamentals that were long thought to be anchors of stability, but are also very prone to disruption. Who would have thought before the pandemic that schools would be entirely replaced by e-learning alternatives? That almost all businesses and their meetings be held electronically, or even court hearings to be held by means of video conference, with almost 100% of the workforce being based now from home? Who would have thought that a democratically elected German chancellor would repeatedly and insistently warn the population to avoid all kinds of travel? Who would have thought that air travel volumes could return to the levels of the 70s? Is it probable that there will be a day where all these massive changes are all of a sudden reversed and brought back to their pre-pandemic status? I don't think so. Our world is not the same anymore, and we have to adapt as quickly as possible. During the summer, we've had a glimpse into what tourism could look like after the pandemic. More local, less crowded, more hygiene and comfort, and decreased overall volumes. Despite being able to command higher prices in the long term for added hygiene and health efforts, as well as increased levels of service in general, the industry will face a severe drain on its margins in the short term, mainly because of oversupply. There will be lots of bankruptcies that are currently just being deferred by the extreme measures that governments have put in place globally. Due to those measures, most companies will make it until the reopening, which in these terms is the easy part. Surviving the ensuing months with weakened balance sheets, lots of debt, demoralized employees and customers, and ceased government support in an oversupplied market space will be the tricky part. But it's all very well worth it, because those companies that make it to the other side of the pandemic, that is far beyond the mere task of fully reopening the economy, will thrive beyond imagination. In the mid to long term, volumes, and margins will far surpass pre-pandemic levels, and the market will be divided among considerably fewer participants. They will be the fittest, and most of them will have achieved that fitness by being perfectly aligned with real digitization. Unfortunately, digitization has become a meaningless buzzword that nowadays can even be attributed to cheese or vegetables. Every piece of technology is marketed under the label of digitization, artificial intelligence, or big data. But in most cases, it's just the label, not the content. Analogous content is marketed in a pseudo-digital packaging that doesn't change its content, but looks nice at first glance. Real digitization is a whole new world and has nothing to do with most of the existing travel technology. Taking a digital photo of a handwritten letter doesn't make the letter digital. It just creates a digital copy of an analog handwritten letter. Even applying high-end OCR techniques on that letter won't make it digital, even if at the least the text could be digitally reproduced in more than just figurative applications. The real magic of digitization happens when computers and systems can understand and process the information that is contained within the letter. When the letter is interpreted and acted upon, when the system understands that this is a birthday letter and starts proposing or even executing complementary paths of action like ordering a bouquet of flowers, and not just some flowers, but the favorite ones of the recipient, ordered at the best rated local florist nearby, for example. Combining all these pieces of information together is an exemplary application of big data. Automated decisions on the actual ordering of the flowers can be called a simple form of artificial intelligence. This is not science fiction, this is real digitization. Speaking on behalf of a tech company, I'll take the risk of diving a little deeper into more tech things despite being anything other than a developer myself. Most incumbent travel technology companies faced a tough 2020, including Kurzarbeit and heavily reduced workloads due to the pandemic. Why did we fare so much better? The main difference is real digitization, instead of just labeling legacy technology as such. For people like me, in the beginning it was tough to separate the wheat from the chaff, and to be honest, I wasn't able to differentiate between real digitization and plain marketing. But there are simple ways to find out which is which. You don't have to be a developer in order to determine if it's just marketing or if it's the real deal. I'll show you in a nutshell, in 5 parts, how you can easily distinguish between the two. First, let's have a look at the basic components, databases. Today, there's even software in active use that doesn't yet use SQL systems, storing data in simple text files or legacy databases from the 80s, or even on punch cards created in the 50s and 60s, all of which being pre-internet technologies. This isn't state-of-the-art at all, and only cripples even the most sophisticated system. Today's systems go beyond SQL databases, using so-called NoSQL structures, MongoDB for example. The main difference between SQL and NoSQL database structures is their architecture, which I'll explain with a very basic concept. Whereas SQL databases are conceived like spreadsheets with the same amount of columns for every row, NoSQL databases can have 1 column for the first row, 7 for the second, and several hundred for the third, for example, providing for much more flexible use cases. If it takes more than a split second for your software to add new fields to existing forms, you probably don't use NoSQL databases. If your software doesn't adapt to your exact needs, or if you have a myriad of wizards, tabs, and forms that you don't actually need, or if you're missing functionalities that would support or streamline your processes and also extend to adapt to your needs, chances are high your software is using one of the old database structures. Second, and to me the easiest litmus test, does your software need walking aids, or can it walk on its own? Some very old systems need additional software like so-called internet booking engines or the like to be compliant with today's very basic requirements that include online functionality. There are systems, ones that are still being used today, that make use of a printer driver in order to print the data into a modern database like SQL. That's a very extreme case of walking aid, and such crippled system constructs only exist in the travel industry. As far as I know, no other industry still has such systems in active use. Third, connectedness. Can you simply use so-called REST APIs in order to send and receive information from or to your system? Does it take less than a few days to implement new application interfaces, so-called APIs in general? Do APIs work instantaneously without errors from the start? And are there automatic so-called integration tests in place that will test all connected services automatically to make sure they're always running properly? Is your software system updated every week or every 2 weeks automatically? In those cases, you're good. Fourth, usability. There are still systems that feel like you're using a very early version of DOS, where the user has to remember certain keyboard shortcuts. There are even systems in active use now that do not even implement a computer mouse. In 2021, in most industries, it's tough to imagine that there are systems that cannot yet be controlled using smartphones or apps. But in travel technology, even the computer mouse seems to be a miraculous invention that still seems miles ahead of and way too high tech for those legacy systems. This is often underestimated. How in this world can users be forced to work with keyboard-only legacy systems in a professional environment when they can even choose a partner while swiping on a phone and having their kids ask them if they found their work equipment in a technical museum? Do users have to perform repetitive tasks? And are those tasks entirely automated? Can your customers and partners log into your system online or via an app? Fifth, complexity. How many different software systems do you need to do your job? Do you have to use spreadsheets for statistics, or does your software provide you with all the information that you need out of the box to do all of your controlling? Ideally, you should use exactly one system and not more for your entire enterprise resource planning, CRM, newsletters, website, etc. That is, by the way, what SIO stands for, Software in One. Real digitization is the single biggest and most important challenge that the tourism industry is facing on its way out of the pandemic. This will cause the cream of the crop to rise to the top and will decide which companies will go bankrupt and which will thrive and survive. Today's world is upside down, but this will not last forever. Humans want to explore the world, connect with each other, and travel. It's in our very nature, and at some point we'll be much more active in travel than pre-pandemic. But this will happen in 3 phases, of which we are currently in the first. The second phase will start when most of the lockdowns and government measures as well as government help will be gone. This will be the toughest period, followed by extreme growth and prosperity in the third. Before the pandemic, I wouldn't have ever imagined that influencers couldn't post their travel adventures anymore because there's a widespread travel shaming culture today. The Spanish flu was followed by the Golden 20s, one of the most active, crazy, and fun decades of the last century. I strongly believe that this pandemic as well will be followed by the Golden 20s of our century, and I can't wait to welcome those post-pandemic celebrations. Thank you very much for your attention, and let's party together as soon as we come out of this mess on the other side. Take care of each other, take care of yourself. See you SAP in person again. Thank you very much.